Hey, Robert. Welcome back. I have another one of these VTK projects for you, the Vision Training Kit. You remember that? It's a bag of stuff I found around my house. And most of it is just from the dollar store, stuff I picked up over time, stuff we gathered for the Vision Rehab Roadshow, but there's nothing special about this. Just a lot of stuff that people mostly have around their house. Today, you might have guessed that there's a theme. Now, there's a lot of this going around. It seems to be spreading. I find these things all over the place. I bump into it. It seems like people are wearing it, using it for furniture. Sometimes they're lying on top of it, taking a holiday on it. I'm not even sure if it's supposed to be used that way, but I'm going to show you something else you can do with this. For now, let me get this out of the way. No, there's a bunch of these around too, right? All right, so let's go to our Vision Training Kit for a second. The point of this, of course, is to find interesting and fun vision therapy or vision rehab games to do at home while you're sitting around wondering what to do next. And we can do an awful lot with little things like this. And so right now, obviously, this one has been stripped of all of its current goodness, and it's on its way to the garbage. Now, what can we do with this? When we were talking about another one of these games, pie plates, we remember, if you remember with the pie plates, we're balancing things out with two hands, and we have to rely on central focus, that is to say our central visual pathway, the what is it pathway, but we also have to rely on the periphery, the side vision, that is to say more of the reflex portion of the visual pathway, the thing that we don't usually pay attention to until we have to. And so with this little trick here, this little device, and again, I've already charged it up, so it's good to go for quite a while. But with this little device, Robert, we can again use this to make the distinction, to observe the difference between central vision, foveal vision, and peripheral retinal vision. And it's really straightforward. All we're going to do is like this. I'm going to put that up to my eyeball, and I'm going to close one eye. Now, as I'm looking through there, this has a pretty broad field, so it does restrict my peripheral vision some, but it's not completely restricted. I have a little bit of latitude there. Okay, and as I'm looking through here, I can scan around the room. Okay, but definitely you get a feeling like there's something funny going on here, like you're missing part of the scene. I'm going to switch it over to the other eye. Same kind of thing. And you notice that there's something missing. And so with this in place, I would encourage people to try just walking around the house, okay, covering that up, making sure the other eye is closed, and then you can just try walking around the house. And if you're working with children, you can make this into a pirate game, and they're looking through their telescope, and they're looking off into the open ocean and across the sea to see what they can find. And you can also give them pathways to navigate. You can give them obstacles to go over. Now, keep these little things in mind. I've got another longer one here. Okay, and this is from another kind of product. It's just a paper roll. And what I've done here, as you can see there, is I have put a tape on the end. As I'm looking through this, I can now draw a target on the end of that tape, and I can use that, and I can fixate on that target as I'm walking around the room. Now, a few things to keep in mind here. The longer the tube, the narrower the tube, the more constricted your field is. And so it's a more of a challenging task, okay? And then the other thing is if you put a target on the end of that, I just put a tape there, so just use a pen and you can put a little target. That helps the person to focus in on that spot, and then that really helps to center that vision on that central pathway, almost completely eliminating the periphery. Robert, one more thing I'm just going to say about peripheral and central vision, just to say that these do actually represent neural pathways in the brain, and typically they're very tightly interwoven. What we're doing here is we're separating those. Okay, and we're forcing our brain to pay attention to peripheral cues by removing those cues, and we have very limited periphery left. And so in that, we're forced to sort of pay attention to what we don't have, if you like. And then likewise, we're forced to focus in on a central target, and we're telling ourselves, don't pay attention to what we're looking at, pay attention to what we can't see, effectively, the periphery. So it's kind of a mixed up game that we're playing here, but the point is that we're separating the peripheral, the central rather, from the peripheral, and those pathways, we cut that communication pathway, and that's really what messes us up. Now what we're going to do is bring them back together, okay? I'm going to take this same tube, and I'm going to focus in on that target on the one hand, and you'll notice that in this case, Robert, I'm keeping my eyes open. Both eyes are open. You can't maybe see my eye down the tube here, but take my word for it. Okay, both eyes are open, and with this in mind, I still have the target here, and so as I'm walking around, ambulating, looking around the place, I can switch between being aware of the one pathway and the other pathway, the whole pathway. And in this sense, if I'm paying attention to this target, both pathways effectively are going to be paying attention to what's at the end of the tube, okay? This pathway gives me more of a peripheral cue, but I can also just switch gears now, Robert, and I can start paying attention to the world with the left while remaining aware of the target at the end of this tube. And so again, I'm very much physically separating those two pathways using something so simple as a cardboard tube. And so in this last instance, we are aware of both pathways, central and peripheral, and we can almost learn to switch between those. And really that's the goal here, to be aware of central processing when we're really paying attention to something, but also to be very acutely aware of the peripheral cues that help us to get around. And again, these peripheral cues are much more tied to our reflexes, our vestibular sense, and our body sense, whereas the central pathway is much more in tune with our cognitive functions. What are we looking at? Why are we looking at it? And Robert, maybe you've got some ideas how you'd like to modify this game for people. Why don't you tell me what you think?
So Dr. Boulet, this is a pretty cool activity. This gives therapists an opportunity to experience sort of the difference from that central vision, that ventral stream, parvocellular tract, and that dorsal stream, that peripheral vision, the magnocellular tract that has so much to do with our balance, with our posture, with our gait, with spatial location near and far. And as you walk around with that tube up and one eye covered, you really lose a lot of that spatial awareness, which is kind of why it makes it feel a bit awkward while you're doing that. So our kids with autism as well have been shown to have problems with this sort of global peripheral processing. They tend to be more centrally focused and not as aware of this sort of global peripheral input that affects their posture and gait so much and has an influence on their motor performance. We also know that our kids with autism, when they need glasses, typically tend to be farsighted or hyperopic. And these hyperopic children are also prone to having decreased peripheral awareness. So those two things together, as we look through these tubes, really give us some insight into how our children with autism, our patients with autism, are experiencing the world visually and how that can affect their performance. Another great activity. Thanks.
And oh, by the way, hey, thanks again for doing this with me, Robert. We've got tons of other VTK options coming up. I look forward to putting those down on video with you and sharing them with all those people stuck at home wondering what they're going to do with these things. All right, take care. We'll talk soon.